Have you ever wondered what a country does when its debt becomes so enormous that it can't ever realistically pay it back? Right now, the United States owes more than $37 trillion. To put that in perspective, just 20 years ago, that amount was larger than the total yearly income of the entire planet. Here's the part almost nobody is saying out loud. They're not planning to repay it the usual ways. No big spending cuts, no massive tax increases, and certainly no default. Instead, the actual strategy is much quieter and cleverer. They're slowly making the dollar worth less over time. This quietly reduces what every dollar in your pocket, your savings account, or your retirement fund can actually buy. And the surprising twist? They're using gold and Bitcoin, things most people think the government has nothing to do with, to pull it off. What we're watching is one of the smartest debt reduction plans ever designed. The government is building up large hidden reserves of Bitcoin and gold. The idea is simple. Let those assets rise dramatically in price. When they do, the sudden huge increase in their value can be used to offset or erase a huge chunk of debt that could never be repaid the normal way. But here's the key thing most people miss, and the part you really need to notice. When gold or Bitcoin skyrockets, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It means the dollar itself is worth less in comparison. That means the money in your wallet buys fewer groceries, gas, or rent. Your savings and bonds lose real value, even if the number printed on them stays the same. Your purchasing power is gently, legally, almost invisibly transferred away. Most people won't even realize it's happening until they're already feeling the squeeze. In this clear breakdown, I'll walk you step by step through exactly how governments have used this kind of reset before in history, and then show you the current signs that suggest the same playbook is being followed today, only this time with digital gold, Bitcoin, added to the mix. By the end, you'll see why this matters to you personally and what you can do about it before the next phase kicks in. This isn't some far-off possibility. It's already in motion, and when these pieces click into place, everything can change very quickly. Once it happens, there's no putting it back the way it was. Let's clear up one huge misunderstanding that almost everyone has. Your personal debt and government debt are completely different animals. If you or I owe too much, we have only three real options: earn more, spend less, or sell something we own. Governments have a fourth option that no ordinary person will ever have. They print and control the money itself. When you control the money, you get to change the measuring stick whenever you want. You can decide tomorrow that an ounce of gold, or a Bitcoin, is suddenly worth a lot more on the government's books. You can expand the money supply. You can quietly rewrite the entire scoreboard, and do it perfectly legally. In short, they can make a mountain of debt disappear, or at least shrink dramatically, without ever actually paying it back, the way you and I understand the term. This exact move has been used many times in history. The clearest modern example happened during the Great Depression. By 1933, America was in the worst part of the Depression. Banks were failing, prices were collapsing, millions were out of work, and the government was buried under debt from World War I plus all the emergency spending. They needed relief fast. So President Roosevelt did something bold. He took the country off the gold standard and through Executive Order 6102, ordered every citizen to turn in their gold coins, gold bullion, and gold certificates to the government. People were paid the official price of $20.67 per ounce, the same price that had been fixed since 1837. Then, once almost all the gold was in the government's hands, the rules changed. In 1934, the official price of gold was raised to $35 per ounce, a 69% increase overnight. With one signature, the government's pile of gold became worth billions more on paper. That instantly made all the existing debt look much smaller compared to the nation's assets, and it gave the Federal Reserve room to create more dollars. The real burden of the debt fell sharply in just a few years. Who paid the bill? Ordinary citizens did, through higher prices and a dollar that slowly bought less. People who had turned in their gold at $20.67 watched the new official price jump to $35, but they weren't allowed to buy it back. They were left holding paper money that lost purchasing power as inflation finally returned. It wasn't secret or sinister, it was open policy, and it worked exactly as designed. The core idea, revaluing the nation's reserve assets to wipe away unsustainable debt, has never gone away. And today, many serious analysts believe we're seeing early signs of the same playbook, just with new assets added to the mix. Here's where things stand right now. The US national debt is roughly $37 trillion. That means the country owes about 132% of everything the entire economy produces in a whole year, a level we haven't seen since World War II. Just paying the interest on that debt now costs around the $1.2 trillion a year, more than the entire defense budget, more than Medicare, and second only to Social Security. If interest rates stay around 5%, that yearly interest bill is on track to hit $1.8 trillion within a few years. That's money that simply leaves the Treasury to pay bondholders, money that isn't reducing the debt at all, just keeping the lights on. Everyone who matters in Washington knows the math. The Congressional Budget Office, the Treasury, and the Federal Reserve have all run the numbers. Their conclusion is the same. There is no realistic way to fix a debt this large with ordinary tools. Tax hikes and spending cuts alone can't do it without causing enormous pain or political pain. So when the usual tools don't work, history shows governments turn to the unusual ones, the ones that involve changing the value of money and assets themselves. And that's exactly what appears to be lining up again today. You can't solve a debt problem this huge just by raising taxes, especially when the total owed is bigger than everything the country produces in a year. You can't outgrow it when the debt is piling up faster than the economy itself. And you can't slash spending enough when just the interest payments are gobbling up such a huge slice of the nation's total output. Once interest costs start taking a big chunk of the economy, the everyday fixes, like higher taxes, faster growth, or tighter budgets, simply fall short. That leaves leaders with the choice no one wants to discuss openly, making the dollar worth less over time. But there's a big problem with that approach. You can't just crank out piles of new money and pretend it won't show. If the government floods the system with fresh dollars all at once, prices shoot up, trust in the currency drops, and people start panicking. Moves like that are way too noticeable and risky. So instead, those in charge search for a sneakier path. Something that looks smart and forward-thinking, not frantic. Something they can pitch as progress, tech upgrades, or protecting the country's interests, rather than admitting they're quietly watering down everyone's money. That's where things like Bitcoin and gold come into play as helpful tools. Back in early 2025, news stories and expert chatter started buzzing about the US considering a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Think of it like the country's emergency oil stockpile, but for digital money. On the surface, the idea was to make sure America doesn't get left behind by places like China, as cryptocurrencies become a bigger part of worldwide finance. It was also a way to cheer on homegrown tech ideas in the crypto world. That's the easy public-facing story. But plenty of close watchers suspect there's more to it. A hidden reason linked straight to handling a national debt that's ballooning and getting pricier by the day. Here's a surprising detail that catches most folks off guard. The US government already owns a hefty chunk of Bitcoin, about 326,000 BTC right now. Most of it came from busting up illegal operations like the Silk Road dark web market, the Bitfinex hack, and ransomware scams. At today's prices, around $92,000 per Bitcoin, that adds up to roughly $30 billion. It's a solid amount, but it's still just a drop in the bucket compared to $37 trillion in total debt. Now, here's where it really heats up. A few lawmakers and experts have pushed ideas that go way further than hanging onto seize Bitcoin. One big one, led by Senator Cynthia Lummis, calls for the government to aim for a full million Bitcoin over the next few years. At current prices, grabbing that much on the open market would run over $92 billion, and it would likely drive Bitcoin's price way higher before they even finished. That's why insiders tracking this say the real approach wouldn't involve big splashy purchases. The smarter play: build it up quietly through back channels that don't rattle markets or grab headlines. That could mean more Bitcoin from active criminal probes, or taking it as payment in deals, fines, or penalties from crypto firms caught breaking rules. There's even talk, mostly in whispers, of the government using its extra energy resources, like unused power plants, to mine Bitcoin itself. And it all adds up to keeping things low-key for a reason. The aim isn't to stockpile at today's going rate. It's to gather as much as possible before some big change makes it worth a fortune tomorrow. In this kind of setup, the whole strategy boils down to one clear goal: scoop up Bitcoin ahead of any major price jump. So let's sketch out how that jump might play out in a made-up but realistic example. Picture Bitcoin hovering around $100,000. Over the next 3 years, the US steadily collects 1 million BTC. Not by snapping up giant batches from trading sites, but through a steady stream of seizures, legal settlements, fines, and careful buys done through middlemen. Say the average price they lock in is about $120,000 per coin, for a total spend of roughly $120 billion. Jump ahead to 2028. The government now sits on that full million BTC, but the public has only a fuzzy idea of how much they really have. Then arrives the turning point that flips the script. That's the moment everything changes. The government steps forward and officially launches, or expands, the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve, and at the same time, it announces a new Strategic Reserve valuation for the Bitcoin it holds on the national balance sheet, exactly the same way they revalued gold in the 1930s. Instead of marking those coins at whatever the market says today, around $92,000, they simply declare that, for official government accounting purposes, each Bitcoin in the reserve is now valued at $1 million, 10 times higher with the stroke of a pen. Here's what happens in one single announcement. The million Bitcoin they quietly accumulated, at an average cost of roughly $120,000 each, total spend approximately $120 billion, instantly appears on the books as worth $1 trillion. Almost $900 billion in new balance sheet wealth is created overnight, without spending another dime. And because the US government is now the largest Bitcoin holder on Earth, and because it has just put the full faith and credit of the United States behind a $1 million valuation, the market can't ignore it. The announcement itself becomes the new price anchor. Bitcoin won't hit $1 million the next day, but it very well could rocket to $300,000, $500,000, even $800,000 or more as investors, institutions, and other countries race to front-run what they now see as inevitable. Close enough for the government's books to be correct and for the debt math to work perfectly. But the real magic, the part almost no one will say out loud, is this. While Bitcoin and gold are shooting higher, the dollar is quietly sliding lower. A $1 million Bitcoin doesn't mean Bitcoin got magically better. It means the dollar just lost that much purchasing power. Every asset that is scarce looks expensive when the measuring stick, the dollar, shrinks. It's the same trick from the 1930s, just with new assets. And speaking of gold, the other half of the silent strategy is already sitting there, waiting. The United States owns 8,133 tons of gold, or about 261 million ounces, at today's actual market price of roughly $4,100 per ounce. That gold is worth more than $1 trillion, over $1 trillion. Yet on the official government balance sheet, because of an old law that has never been updated, every ounce is still carried at $42.22, the price from the early 1970s. That means the books show the entire US gold reserve as worth only about $11 billion. $11 billion. Think about that. The country is sitting on an asset worth over $1 trillion in the real world. Yet the accounting rules still pretend it's 1971. All it would take is one line in a bill, one executive order, or one quiet change in Treasury policy to mark that gold closer to market value. And hundreds of billions, or even $1 trillion, in new wealth appears on the government's books overnight. The debt doesn't vanish, but it suddenly looks a lot smaller next to massively revalued reserves. Bitcoin and gold, working together. One move for the future asset, one move for the legacy asset. Same result. The dollar loses purchasing power gradually, legally, and in a way most people won't even recognize until years later, when groceries, rent, and everything else feels painfully more expensive. And by then, the wealth transfer is already complete. This isn't conspiracy. It's historical precedent meeting modern assets. It's the same playbook, just updated for the 21st century. And all the pieces are already in place. Why would any sensible government keep one of its biggest assets valued at a crazy low price from the 1970s? Simple. It gives them a massive hidden bonus they can unlock whenever they want. Keeping the official book price frozen at $42.22 an ounce means they can revalue it upward later and create trillions in new balance sheet wealth with a single announcement. It's like owning a house you bought for $50,000 in 1971 and still carrying it on your books at that price today, even though it's worth 20 times more. One day, you just update the number and boom, you're suddenly much richer on paper. So let's walk through exactly how a gold revaluation could play out. Imagine the Treasury announces a new official strategic reserve valuation for gold of $20,000 per ounce. Not today's market price, currently around $4,100 to $4,200. $20,000 an ounce. That single number is chosen because it makes the math work perfectly. 261 million ounces times $20,000 equals roughly $5.2 trillion. Overnight, the government's gold goes from the laughable official $11 billion to more than $5 trillion, without buying or selling one single ounce. Now, stack that on top of the Bitcoin move we talked about earlier. 1 million BTC officially marked to $1 million each, $1 trillion. Gold officially marked to $20,000 per ounce, $5.2 trillion. That's $6.2 trillion of new, instantly recognized asset value, created by simply updating the price tags on assets the country already owns. The $37 trillion debt doesn't disappear, but suddenly the balance sheet looks dramatically stronger. The debt-to-GDP ratio drops sharply. Markets calm down, and the whole system gets breathing room most people thought was impossible. But the real fireworks come in the markets after the announcement. When the United States, the world's largest gold holder and the issuer of the world's reserve currency, declares that its strategic gold is worth $20,000 an ounce, the market price doesn't stay stuck at $4,100 for long. Investors, central banks, and billionaires around the world will rush in, pushing the price higher and higher until it gets much closer to that new official anchor. The same thing happens with Bitcoin once it's given a $1 million reserve valuation. And here's the part almost everyone misses. The part that actually matters to you and me. While gold is rocketing toward $20,000 and Bitcoin toward $1 million, the dollar is quietly sliding in the exact opposite direction. Every surge in those assets is really just the flip side of the same coin. The dollar losing purchasing power. It's not that gold and Bitcoin are magically becoming more valuable. It's that the dollar is becoming less valuable. And the government just made it official, respectable, and even popular. That's the silent, sophisticated devaluation most people will never see coming. If the price of gold shoots up from today's level of about $4,100 an ounce to $20,000, that really means the dollar has lost roughly 80% of its value when measured against gold. If Bitcoin climbs from its current price of around $92,000 to $1 million, the dollar has lost about 91% of its value against Bitcoin. In this entirely possible scenario, the whole revaluation of gold and Bitcoin reserves is just a quiet, sophisticated devaluation of the dollar itself. A way to make the real burden of the $37 trillion debt shrink dramatically, without the government ever having to openly print money and trigger immediate chaos. Most people don't check gold or Bitcoin prices every day. They check the price of groceries, gas, rent, and car insurance. But when the dollar loses 80 to 91% of its purchasing power against the scarcest assets on Earth, that loss doesn't stay neatly contained in the gold and crypto corner. It spreads to everything. Food gets more expensive. Energy gets more expensive. Housing, cars, medical bills. Everything takes more dollars because the dollars themselves are worth less. Here's what it actually feels like in real life. You have $100,000 saved today, a decent safety net, maybe a house down payment, or a comfortable buffer for retirement. Now imagine the revaluation playbook gets executed and the dollar devalues in the way the gold and Bitcoin prices suggest. Even if inflation only runs at 20% a year for 3 years, the real felt at the store kind, not the massaged official numbers. Here's what happens to your money. Year 1. Prices up 20%. Your $100,000 buys what approximately $83,300 buys today. Year 2, another 20%, now buys what approximately $69,400 buys today. Year 3, another 20%, now buys what only approximately $57,900 buys today. You didn't spend a dime, didn't make a bad investment, didn't take any risk. And almost half your life savings purchasing power just disappeared. And that's the gentle version. If the devaluation implied by $20,000 gold and $1 million Bitcoin hits faster or harder, the inflation could easily spike to 30%, 50%, or more in a single years. The kind of numbers that turn $100,000 into the buying power of $20,000 to $30,000 in today's dollars, almost overnight. Most people will wake up one day and feel poorer, without ever understanding why. They'll blame greedy corporations, supply chains, or shrinkflation. Anything except the real cause. A deliberate, legal, top-down transfer of purchasing power from every dollar holder to the balance sheet of the United States government. That's the hidden cost of the most elegant debt reset strategy ever designed. And it's paid by everyone who believed just hold dollars and you'll be fine. In that scenario, food and fuel double in price. Rent climbs by 60%. By the end of 3 years, your $100,000 savings only buys what $35,000 would have bought at the start. You've lost 65% of your real purchasing power. Meanwhile, the headline debt number hasn't changed. It's still around $37 trillion. But because of the inflation-fueled devaluation, the real burden of that debt would shrink dramatically. In this model, the real value of that debt might drop to around $13 trillion. In effect, $24 trillion of the debt burden vanishes, not through repayment, but through inflationary dilution. In other words, the government doesn't pay back what it owes. It just makes the dollars they owe you worth a lot less. That's the heart of this strategy. And if you want to see where some of the pieces are already in place, there's a striking piece of legislation. Back in December 2024, Senator Cynthia Lummis introduced what's being called the Bitcoin Act. As proposed, the US would acquire 1 million bitcoins over 5 years, hold them in a strategic reserve for at least 2 decades, and treat them as an official reserve asset. The bill hasn't just attracted support from one side of the aisle. Both Democrats and Republicans are backing it. Why? Because many lawmakers apparently believe the debt is unmanageable, and that devaluation, rather than deep spending cuts or massive tax hikes, is the only viable escape hatch. If this playbook becomes official, this isn't about crypto for innovation. According to this view, it's about debt restructuring through asset revaluation. Fast forward to January 2025. President Trump signs an executive order creating something brand new in American policy, a strategic Bitcoin reserve. With one signature, the Treasury now has the green light to start acquiring and holding Bitcoin. Federal agencies are told to build out digital asset frameworks, and Bitcoin is reclassified, not as a speculative toy, but as a national security asset. So your choice becomes straightforward: adapt or get run over by the changes coming. You can position yourself in assets that tend to hold value when currencies weaken, things like gold, Bitcoin, real estate, or other hard assets. You can focus on preserving your purchasing power so you can rebuild on the other side of whatever financial transition unfolds. Or you can keep everything in dollars, trust the official narrative, and hope the people in charge are putting your long-term financial security ahead of their own priorities. One path is preparation. The other is blind trust. I know which route I'm taking. I know where the sophisticated investors are leaning. The real question is, which direction will you choose? And before we wrap up, if this timeline changed the way you think about the next few years, don't go through it alone. You can join the channel membership where I break down developments in real time, policy changes, macro signals, market behavior, and how the broader reset narrative is evolving. Members get deeper research notes, private videos, and early access to timeline updates as they unfold. If protecting your wealth matters to you, stay close, stay informed, stay ahead. Over the next 2 years, I'll be tracking every major shift, showing you the signs as they appear and what they might mean. Being early to these signals can be the difference between holding your ground and watching your savings erode quietly. Share this with anyone you know who has savings, retirement accounts, or long-term plans tied to the dollar. They deserve to understand the risks and prepare for a changing world. Again, this isn't financial advice. Always do your own research and make decisions that fit your goals and risk tolerance. But whatever you do, don't wait until it's too late to act.